Today, Donald Trump arrested in New York. Historic scenes, unprecedented. A former president in a courthouse charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. For the first time today, we saw the full case against Trump. The seal lifted on the indictment and the evidence laid bare. And this case should disturb you whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat or indifferent, whether or not you hate Trump with all the passion you can muster, or whether you have a MAGA hat. This is unquestionably a politically motivated abuse of the criminal justice system. And this isn't to say Trump doesn't have a strong case to answer in Georgia, where he's being investigated for voter fraud and attempts to interfere with the 2020 election. And it's not to say there isn't a strong case against him for failing to secure classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, or even in the civil suit where the Trump organization overinflated its property values. But in this first case, where Trump was today arrested, fingerprinted and arraigned in his hometown of New York in what has amounted to a global spectacle, here the evidence against him is lacking and the case is flimsy. Let's look at the detail. Trump was charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records as part of an orchestrated scheme to influence the 2016 presidential campaign by paying hush money to stop negative stories about his sexual affairs from hitting the news. The 34 counts each relate to an individual business record. It's the 34 payments to Michael Cohen to reimburse him for the hush money. The indictment reads, the defendant, Donald J. Trump, repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York business records to conceal criminal conduct that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. And the indictment detailed three payments: $130,000 paid to porn star Stormy Daniels through fixer Michael Cohen. The second payment, $150,000 to former Playboy model Karen McDougal by American Media Inc., and that's the parent company of the National Enquirer. And a $30,000 payment to a former Trump Tower doorman who falsely claimed that Trump had fathered a child out of wedlock. As I said, these payments were made to kill negative news stories ahead of the election. Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for the hush money payments, but disguised them as legal expenses. This is all true, but it's not a crime. Now, no journalist would agree with the nature of hush money payments. They're the antithesis of our aim to tell the public about political scandals or corruption. These payments were a corrupt way to stop the public learning about Trump's extramarital and grubby affairs. As unethical as they are, as horrible as they are, they're not illegal. Hush money payments are not illegal. And we have here a Democratic, and I say that in the sense of his political leanings, a Democratic prosecutor is trying to twist and turn these unethical payments into criminal conduct. And this is why commentators from left-wing CNN to the Wall Street Journal are saying that the case is weak. Prosecutor Bragg claims that Trump falsified the records in order to conceal another crime. The indictment reads that Trump falsified the business records, and I quote, with intent to defraud and intent to commit another crime and aid and conceal the commission thereof. But Bragg doesn't go on to explain what crime Trump is trying to conceal. And Trump hasn't been charged with a more serious crime. As the Wall Street Journal reports, here's the big question that Mr. Bragg still hasn't adequately answered. Where is the second crime? They write, recall that falsifying business records is a misdemeanor in New York. It's a felony only if the books were cooked with an intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof. When Mr. Trump worked out this reimbursement arrangement with Mr. Cohen, what other crime was he allegedly trying to cover up? Now, Bragg can build a case about misuse of campaign finances and breaching the cap on political donations. He can base this on Michael Cohen pleading guilty to making an illegal financial contribution. But this is a weak case. Here's CNN's former counsel, US Assistant Attorney General, making this point.
In terms of a case that's being brought against a former president, it's a little underwhelming. There's not more to it.
Well, speaking as someone who very strongly does not want Donald Trump to get the Republican presidential nomination, I'm extraordinarily distressed by this document. I think this is even weaker than I feared it would be. And I think it's easily subject to being dismissed or a quick acquittal for Trump.
And that was John Bolton there, no fan of Trump's. The Wall Street Journal editorial board reports there are few surprises except perhaps astonishment that Mr. Bragg's case looks even weaker than we expected. The left-wing Washington Post had multiple columns highly critical of this case. Columnist George F. Will described this as a jerry-built case brought against Trump by Manhattan's elected Democratic District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and he says it's likely to collapse in a courtroom. And another Washington Post columnist, associate editor Ruth Marcus, wrote that the Trump indictment is a dangerous leap of the highest of wires. She writes, the hard question is whether those efforts also violated the criminal law. On that front, the indictment unsealed on Tuesday is disturbingly unilluminating, and the theory on which it rests is debatable at best, unnervingly flimsy at worst. She writes, that is a scary situation when it comes to the first criminal charges ever lodged against a former president. She goes on to write, what are the other crimes Trump is accused of covering up? The indictment doesn't say. She continues, the fears I had in the weeks leading up to the indictment about the strength of the case against Trump were in no way allayed by Tuesday's developments. Now, Bragg couldn't properly answer questions about this at his own press conference.
We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were also broken.
Right. So let me say as an initial matter that the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
As the Wall Street Journal says, after dragging the country through the indictment of a former president, the first in US history, Mr. Bragg owes the public a better explanation. It is undoubtedly a weak case, and there is no escaping this is highly political. It sets a precedent for using the justice system against politicians. A dangerous precedent. It also gives Trump a platform to become a victim, a martyr.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. We are a nation in decline. And now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement. This is a persecution, not an investigation. They can't beat us at the ballot box, so they try and beat us through the law.
As to whether this will garner support for Trump, absolutely. Americans will be furious at the justice system being used to throw political opponents in prison. Here's what Fox News host Jesse Waters told his viewers.
Earlier today, for the third time, Democrats are trying to take away your right to vote for a Republican. First, they impeached Trump during an election year. They wanted to invoke the 25th Amendment, kick him out of office for not being mentally fit. And now they're trying to put him in prison before an election. For people who claim they care about voting rights, they're nuking them. There's nothing more undemocratic than putting your political opponent in prison. And a filthy DA is assassinating your right to vote. What's the crime? Well, the indictment says Trump made a false entry in the general ledger. Lock him up. He made a false entry in the ledger. Alvin Bragg will not stand for false entries in ledgers.
Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records.